What's going on, guys? This is the Edge DFS. We're talking Showdown, Thursday Night Football, Giants versus Eagles. T. Smith here, Ellie Hernandez, A-Dubs King. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Pretty good, man. How about yourself?
Not bad. We got a kind of a stinker here to talk about. Let's get right into it.
NFC East matchups where absolutely nothing's going to happen. So it'll be
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly. Let's look at the lines here. So we got Giants versus, Philly, the Eagles, the fight for second place, I guess, at this point. We got a 45 total. It's a -4.5 spread. Eagles are favored quite a bit here, which isn't too surprising, but I think there's a lot we can work with when it comes to getting some leverage. I don't think the Giants are as bad as their record. I think they're bad, but I think they have a little bit of upside. I think that Philadelphia is bad, and they have a little bit higher upside. So we just have to figure out how to play this correctly. What are your thoughts on this slate as a football game in general? And then we'll get into the DFS side of things.
So for a football game in general, one thing that I've been learning a little bit is bad teams generally make for decent offense and just garbage points when it comes to fantasy. I really think that we could see the over here on this game. So I would expect to see some points. I think both teams are pretty garbage on the defensive end. There's enough talent on this offensive side of the ball for both sides, even though Philly really only has Carson Wentz, to put up some decent points. And the Giants, they really can score fairly quickly when things are going right for them. But I don't know. I think it's going to be a game of momentum, and whoever gets the most momentum is probably going to win this game. So, I think game script is going to be key here, and guessing the game script is going to be entirely necessary to get this one right.
Yeah, so if you look at the total projected points here, we don't have ownership yet, but if you look at the projected points, it can kind of say a lot here because last week it was a 3-point spread, I believe, on Sunday Night Football, and both teams were projected for around the same amount of points. In this case, it is a little bit heavier of a spread, a little bit heavier odds towards the favorite, but the point differential is quite a bit when it comes to DFS points projected here. So I think the optimizers are going to lean heavily towards Philadelphia. And I just doing some crunches, some basic crunches with no randomness, nothing, just using the canned projections. I basically got all Philadelphia. We got some Danny Dimes in there. We got a couple of other players, but it was all Eagles. When it comes to DFS-wise, how do you think the ownership is going to lean, and which direction can we go to get some leverage on the field?
I would expect the Philadelphia side of the ball to be a little bit more heavy when it comes to stacking. But overall, I think most people are going to go with a 3-3 build because I think you're going to have to spread out a little bit. I mean, I assume the most common build is going to be both quarterbacks and Boston Scott and then a Giants receiver or two, right? So
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to start looking at differences when it comes to the quarterbacks. And as much as I want to play them both, you're going to have to find a pretty deep sleeper to be able to do that to get rid of some of the ownership. So I don't know, man. It's going to be interesting. Again, I think game script is going to be key here, and building a couple lineups that fit that game script is really how we're going to have to approach this.
All right, so a lot of what we're dealing with is going to have to revolve around injuries. So let's look at injuries for this slate. The Giants don't really have a lot, but the guy they have, Sterling Shepard, if he plays, that's going to change a lot for us, in my opinion. It's going to change a whole lot. Now, the Eagles, they're just fucked up. There's a lot of problems with the Eagles. You got Miles Sanders, Zach Ertz, Alshon Jeffrey for sure out. You got Goddard, he's coming off the IR. He's not going to play. They have him listed as doubtful, but he's not going to play. Rager, most likely not going to play. So with Miles Sanders out, You've got to deal with Boston Scott. We're back to Boston Scott chalk week. Not a place I want to be. And with Sterling Shepard out, you got Darius Slayton, you've got Golden Tate, you've got a lot of different options there. Let's start with the Giants. With Sterling Shepard out, what are you thinking receiver-wise, tight end-wise? How do we approach if Shepard is out? And if he's in, how does that change things for you?
I honestly, it doesn't change all that much on the Giants side of the ball. I'm gonna be heavy on 4-2 stacks favoring New York. I'm gonna have a lot of Danny Dimes, and then I'm gonna be rotating Golden Tate, Evan Ingram, and Slayton or Shepard pretty consistently. So I want exposure to two of the receivers and probably a tight end on top of the quarterback if I can afford it, right? So I'll be all over the place with all of them. I'll probably have equal exposure to all three wide receivers, and then if he's out, then I'll just have more of the other two.
Yeah, I mean, Slayton is kind of the guy this year.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at his snap counts, he's basically 100% snap counts. Last week, he got 88% of the snap count. Shepard hasn't played since, week 2, I believe. And, Shepard was the guy in previous years. Slayton has definitely stepped up. So I don't know what that does for ownership. In my opinion, I think Sterling Shepard, he's probably going to be questionable right up until, inactives are released 90 minutes before lock. I think Shepard is going to be way underowned if he does play. So that is some leverage you can grab because this guy is the number one wide receiver on this team. And he's priced at $7,000. Slayton's priced at $9,200. You can get a whole hell of a lot of leverage by just adjusting to news. But I personally just like Slayton more in, generally. The only reason why I would pivot is simply because of ownership and adjusting to that. So let's move over to the Eagles. We got Miles Sanders out. We got Zach Ertz. Goddard's out. So let's attack the backfield of the Eagles real quick. So we got Boston Scott is going to be the starting running back. Now, when he stepped in for Sanders earlier in the year, I think it was week 1 and 2, he didn't do diddly poo. He didn't do shit. So, you got Corey Clement as well, who's not very good either. How do you approach this? I think Boston Scott at that price, at $8,400, is going to be super highly owned. When I crunched out a couple hundred lineups, he was in almost every lineup, either as a captain or as a flex player. I just don't love Boston Scott. What do you think about him? What do you think about Clement in the backfield for this team?
Hey. So, I'm looking at Corey Clement a decent amount. I mean, granted, he is priced up, but I think if this game stays competitive, they're going to try and use him to spell in that third round running back situation. And he's quick and capable of being a receiver. Now, the problem is literally every running back on the Philadelphia Eagles is the same person. They're essentially the Danny Woodheads of the Patriots, right? Like, I mean, all three of them are the exact same guy. So, I mean, it really just depends on who gets the monster share, the carries. I mean, but again, we're playing PPR. So if we think Corey Clement's going to end up with a few more opportunities in the pass game, then I think he's an interesting play. Because, again, the Giants' defense isn't very good. And I assume they'll be getting him be getting Clement the ball in the flat and running screens and quick routes like that. So, I mean, that one short catch could turn into 20, 25 yards pretty quickly. So I really like Corey Clement. Boston Scott, again, I think you're going to have some exposure. I'd like to fade him as much as I can, but he could very easily be the top scorer. He is the best player on the team right now. That's the only problem.
But the issue with him is he's had the opportunity, in my opinion, and he just has not come through. So I don't know where the field's going to come in, if they're going to be jaded like I am. If they're going to be jaded, he might be lower owned. If he's lower owned, I'd have to think about playing him a little bit more. If he comes in as, a top 3 owned player on the slate, I'm just going to X him out.
Yeah.
I immediately am different if I X this guy out. So let's move on to tight ends here. You have 2 of the best tight ends, or you have the best tight end core here on a team. You've got basically 1A and 1B at this point with Goddard and Ertz both out. So I don't even know who the hell these guys are. I mean, you got Richard Rodgers. I don't know what his fantasy upside is. I think he can do okay, but he's priced at $5,000. This is like a $1,400 player, on a normal week. I know he's starting for this team, but it doesn't mean he's that much of a better player. Sort of the Boston Scott syndrome. So, and then also you've got Croom and Butler. Hakeem Butler has not actually stepped on the field for this team. Former was a 3rd round pick for the Cardinals as a wide receiver. This guy is a grown man. I had high hopes for him as a Cardinals fan. For whatever, he got injured in his first season. He got cut at the beginning of this year, signed on to the team week 3 or whatever. This guy can play. He's a good receiver. He's a pass catching guy. Do you have any interest in tight ends for
Yeah. I'll be all over Richard Rodgers. I mean, Deshawn Jackson's playing, but other than that, I don't believe in any of these guys. Fulgham, he had one good game. I still don't trust in a lot of their wide receivers. And Richard Rodgers he's a pass catching receiver, so he can help split the middle of the field to open up some of these other plays for Deshawn Jackson and for Boston Scott even. But I'm going to have a healthy amount of Richard Rodgers personally.
We'll get into Fulgham in a minute. But let's see. Jalen Reagor, another guy that's injured. Alshon Jeffrey out. The good news is Deshawn Jackson's back. I don't know how good this guy is anymore. I mean, I know. Let's just look at what he's got going on here. So he played the first 3 weeks. Week 2, he had 9 targets, 64 yards. He's probably been averaging around 5 targets a game for the first 3 weeks. I just don't know how good he is. We'll get into the wide receivers in a minute for these teams. But with Deshaun Jackson back, I think it changes a lot. And I think that people could possibly overreact on him ownership-wise this week because he's the only guy that they can throw the ball to. So let's move on to... Let's talk a little bit about ownership, and I want to get your opinion on where some of the ownership is going to actually land this week. So, I think I crunched out a handful of lineups. I think Boston Scott is going to be the 3rd highest owned guy on the slate. But let's look at quarterback wise. I think Daniel Jones is not going to be as high owned as we thought, similar to Jimmy G last week. Jimmy G, what was Jimmy G last week? What was he, like 20%, 30%? Something insanely low. Do you remember that? What was his ownership last week?
I believe he was 33.
Which is crazy. I don't think that Daniel Jones is going to be that low owned, but I do think that he will be under owned, in my opinion, because he has the rushing upside against a bad defense.
I'm all in with you on this one. I will have like I said, I will have a lot of Daniel Jones. The only lineups that I won't have Daniel Jones in are going to be like specifically targeted lineups where I'm intentionally fading him. Otherwise, he'll be in probably every lineup.
All right, we'll talk about Carson Wentz for a little bit here. Let me know what you think about Carson Wentz.
I mean, Carson Wentz, I'm really on the same page, right? I feel the same about him that I do as Daniel Jones. Again, with all the injuries, especially with Miles Sanders being out, I'm more concerned that Carson Wentz is going to have to take on all of the scoring for the team. So, I mean, that's either a bad thing or it's a good thing. Fantasy-wise, I expect it to have pretty decent output, but, you might have a couple interceptions here and there or a fumble. I mean, the Giants' defense could come up with a couple points, right? It might be worth getting a lineup or two in there, but that's really, you think this game stays competitive, which I think it will. I think it will be a lot closer than what people are expecting. Deshawn Jackson is not enough to favor the Eagles so much in this matchup, given the fact that both these teams are just garbage. So remember, they lost to Washington. So I really don't know, man. This could be a toilet bowl.
I just don't know how to play this. I mean, in my opinion, I actually think these quarterbacks are just shit on for the wrong reasons. And I think they're good quarterbacks. I think they have upside. DFS-wise, I really want to play both these guys in lineups. I usually try to fade one quarterback just to make myself different. I usually take a stand on one guy and say he's going to have a shitty game. In this case, I actually like going with both of them. And I know the optimizers might like that. Let me just look here. If I look at Carson Wentz, and so in lineups that Carson Wentz is in, Daniel Jones is in half of those lineups. Both these guys, you put them in a lineup together. I think this week, to me, I like that better than weeks past. Typically, I like to fade one quarterback, just take a stand on him. From a median projection aspect, you can gain a lot of leverage by just fading one of these quarterbacks or just, limiting your exposure so you don't have both quarterbacks in every lineup. A game like this, I think these are the best players on their respective teams. I think Daniel Jones he's shit on because he's on a shitty team. I think he has upside. If you put him on a better team, I think he actually is a good player. I think Carson Wentz is also a good player. So if you look at the crunches that I did, just with some canned projections here, and about 50% of the time they end up in a lineup together. How are you going to handle this quarterback-wise? Do you like playing both quarterbacks this week? I know in the past we've tried to fade one or at least limit exposure on one because the optimizers just love that. But I think Daniel Jones can be a little bit under-owned this week.
Yeah, I'm going to go both quarterbacks, and you might be able to get fairly unique builds by stacking Carson Wentz and Jake Elliott. You could have literally all the scoring output from the Philadelphia Eagles just by capturing those two guys. And, that'd be pretty different, but you'd still capture all the scoring and be able to run a pretty decent stack with the Giants the other way back. But yeah, I'm running both. I'll have a lot of both quarterbacks. You mentioned it earlier, but the rushing upside is incredibly important.
Well, look, I mean, just watching the game last week against the football team, the Giants, they didn't look great. Obviously, they're not a good team. But Daniel Jones, man, he had a couple long carries. He was looking like a supersized version of Kyler Murray out there. I think Daniel Jones has that potential, and I actually am loving the prop bets of first to score go to a quarterback because the odds are just crazy. At least in the past, you've got Drew Brees at I don't know what is it, plus 1,000 just to score a touchdown or plus 800, something crazy. Right. That's a whole nother subject, but I feel like Daniel Jones is a lock for a rushing touchdown this week. As much of a lock as you can throw out there because they just don't have the rushing attack. And we'll move on to running backs in this case. So for the Giants, you've got two of the oldest players in the world at this point. At least it seems like it. I feel like I played with these guys in Madden 2008. You got Devontae Freeman, who's now starting. They literally dragged this guy off a Greyhound bus and just threw him on the field. And you've got Dion Lewis, who I think won a Super Bowl in 2001. I don't know. This guy's really old. Wayne Gallman, who's probably touched the ball twice this year. Giants wise, I'm comfortable fading these guys depending on the ownership. If Devontae Freeman comes in higher owned than I want him to be because of his price, I think I'm going to fade him. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest key for me. I'm going to be looking at Devontae Freeman's ownership. His price is interesting, but other than that, I'm pretty much going to shy away. I think this game's going to be competitive, and I don't think it's going to be heavily run dependent. If it is, it's going to come from Daniel Jones. So I want more Daniel Jones in the receivers, and just hope that Freeman doesn't have one of his signature 3 touchdown days.
I mean, the thing that worries me with fading Freeman is if you look at his past 3 weeks of attempts, you got 18 attempts, 17 attempts, and 11 attempts. And specifically in the past 2 weeks, he's had a minimum of 17 attempts. He's got a couple targets as well. So it does scare me because he could fall into the end zone twice. In my opinion, I think Daniel Jones has a better rushing upside at the goal line. I think if it's a 3rd and short, they're going to just let him sneak it. But Devontae Freeman, just keep an eye on his ownership. I feel like the chances of him going off are not very high. And if he's above 30-40% owned, I'm just gonna probably limit him to two lineups out of a 20 max. What do you think about Dion Lewis? Last week he caught a couple passes. I just don't think he gets enough volume. If the Giants are losing, which in theory they should be, I think we're going to see a lot more Dion Lewis than we expect, and he could get a couple passes here and there. He's been targeted a decent amount. I mean, this entire year, even with Saquon, we've seen him get targeted, 3, 4, 5 times a game. Any interest in Dion Lewis?
No, not really. Again, this will be an ownership play if I decide to get him in. But I've been keeping an eye on him in my season longs, and I've been actually watching him week to week because I thought he might be a decent value at some point. But it doesn't look like it. He's just not getting a share of carries, and it's trending the opposite direction as opposed to good for him. So it's just not worth it to me.
So we've talked about Boston Scott and Corey Clement. Real quick, 30 seconds. Where are you going down this Boston Scott road? I know we're waiting for ownership. I just know he's going to be high owned because he's 8,400 and he's the starting running back on the favored team, and the optimizers fucking love him. You can click crunch and he'll be in every one of your lineups either as a captain or a flex. To me, that's just an obvious fade.
Yeah. So the ownership is interesting. The only thing that I'm running into in this point is I know that there's a lot of players I'm not going to play. So I may just have to have some exposure just because I need an extra player to fill out a lineup. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's really where it's going to be interesting. And again, that's why I'm going to be keeping a very close eye to the ownership, because if everything starts going Boston Scott's way and Devontae Freeman's coming in pretty low owned, I mean, that might just be a pretty significant pivot. So I don't know, man. I'm trying to get as limited exposure as I can to him. And I will have a little bit of Corey Clement, but again, at that pricing, I mean, it's too tight to really take a stab on him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, Corey Clement should be like $1,600.
Yes.
Or like $2,000. I don't know why he's priced that high. I we talk about it every week. I love the backup running back, especially that dude on 3rd down that can catch a 15-yard garbage time screen and pick up a lot of those points. I feel like that is always the best way to go on a favored team. You throw the running back and the captain, or you double stack both running backs from the favored team, and the leverage is pretty high because no one wants to play a negatively correlated group of players. In this case, I totally actually agree with that. I don't want anything to do with Corey Clement at that price. I might have 1 or 2 lineups. I think I'll have more Corey Clement than Boston Scott in this case because I know he's going to be high owned. Let's go to wide receivers. Let's talk about the Giants wide receivers. You got Slayton Shepherd, Tate, Austin Mack, Damian Ratley, and some other scrubs who aren't even given a projection. Can you go down to Golden Tate if Shepherd plays? Will that help with the ownership on Tate? What are you thinking? Are you just going all in on Slayton like I am?
I won't go all in on Slayton just because he is expensive, but I mean, I'm going to have a lot. Like I said, I mean, he's still probably going to be like 60-70% of my ownership share, but I'm going to rotate a lot of him, Golden Tate, and possibly both, right? And if Sterling Shepard plays, then I'll do Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard. But they will be a staple in my lineups. Every single lineup will have at least one or two of these guys.
How much do you like Tate at only $4,000 less than Shepard if he plays? Do you X out Tate and just stick with Shepard?
No, I think I honestly think that makes him even better of a play, right? Because that Shepard ownership has to come from somewhere. I expect it to come a little bit of from Tate and probably a little off Slayton too. But I mean, 6,600 Golden Tate. I mean, we've seen it. The guy looks like he's dust, and then he scores 2 touchdowns for no reason, absolutely
Exactly.
no reason. So
Exactly.
I I have to have a little bit of him. He could be the best player on the field. He could also get injured in the first snap. So I'm gonna have some, not way too heavy, but I'm gonna have a pretty decent exposure to Golden Tate, regardless of the Shepard situation.
I always, every time Golden Tate is on a slate, I just have to play him. I know he's getting old. I know that this is a bad team. I just feel drawn to playing him because I know he's a much better receiver than he's actually played in his career, and he's got the upside to get 7-8 catches and 85 yards and a touchdown. And at that price, I feel like that's a pretty good value. So I'm going to get a little bit of Golden Tate, more specifically if Shepard plays. If Shepard doesn't play, I might actually stay away from Tate because the ownership is going to sort of funnel towards him. Let's go to Philly, their wide receivers. You got Fulgham at 8,800, Deshawn Jackson 5,800, Greg Ward 4,800, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside 2,400, and John Hightower at 1,200. Is Fulgham overrated? He's actually, if you look at his box scores here, fantasy wise, this dude's been fucking killing it. Dude didn't even have a projection the first 2 weeks, and scored 13 with a touchdown, 34 in his famous week, and then about 20 last week. I don't know. I mean, he's undefeated this as far as crushing his expectations. Do you have to go down that road again?
I mean, I don't know, man. I don't believe it.
It's a dice roll. It's a dice roll.
Who are these games against? You got San Francisco,
Pittsburgh, and Baltimore. So halfway decent defenses.
Yeah, they're legit teams, and he's been doing all right. But I watched that Ravens game. All those yards came up in garbage time. They were down by 30 points. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm concerned with. If he's going to go out and get garbage point touchdowns, and then yeah, you got to have some exposure. But again, at 8,800, I don't know if I need to spend up for that. I like Deshawn Jackson better personally, because again, we're talking about 1 reception, 1 touchdown, all right, and we're not breaking the bank to get him. So that's where I'm at with this. I don't think I'm going to have much Fulgham, unless it's the only way to get off Boston Scott.
So look, it all depends on your thoughts on how good Deshaun Jackson is. If he's still that number 1 threat, and if Carson Wentz still loves him, then I think you have to get away from Fulgham, because this guy Fulgham has had the lion's share of targets. On the season he's at 25% of the target share, which is the highest on the team for active players, and the dude has only played week 4, 5, and 6. So in the weeks he's played, he's absolutely crushed it. Last week, 25% of the targets. Week before, 36% of the targets. And no one's even close. So he is definitely the number 1 wide receiver with their previous group of players. If you think that Deshaun Jackson can come in and steal, 10 to 15% of those targets from him, I think you have to fade him. I just don't know how good Deshaun Jackson is at this point. He always seems to surprise everyone with the fact that he's still as fast as he ever was. I think it's one of those things. It's going to depend on ownership. If recency bias comes into play and Fulgham's 40% owned, I might have to just go half the field. If he's 20% owned because he's so expensive, I might double the field. We'll just have to see when ownership comes out. Something to keep an eye on. Don't just play Fulgham because you like him. Don't just play Fulgham because of what he's projected. Look at the ownership first and then make a decision from there, because ownership in Showdown is the most important thing. Don't worry about median projections. Look at the ownership. Greg Ward is an interesting guy. He doesn't have much upside, but we've got a week 3 performance of 20 points, so with 11 targets. He gets targeted. I don't know that I'm going to have a lot of them, but I'll probably be with the field on him. Anybody else stick out on this with this receiving core here?
No, I'll probably end up with a little bit of Greg Ward just because of his pricing, but absolutely not. The return of Deshawn Jackson and the uncertainty between the share, target share that Fulgham's getting, I really don't want to touch this. It's really, even if somebody does go off, it's really low upside. I mean, Travis Fulgham's going to need 20 points to pay off his price tag, 15 points. Deshawn Jackson, I mean, even if he only has 2 catches for 40 yards, he's pretty much in line with what you're expecting for 5.8K. Greg Ward, he'd have to have pretty much a 7-target game for it to really give the upside that he needs, and I think it's too risky given the fact that Deshaun Jackson's back. And that's really just where I'm at with that. If Deshaun Jackson was out, Greg Ward's a great play.
J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, which if you say his name, it seems like you're saying it with a lisp, which is really funny. But this guy was touted as being, one of the top 2 guys on this team at the beginning of the year. I'm assuming injuries came into play. He's not getting targeted. He's not getting the snaps. I'd be willing to take like a flyer on this dude for like one lineup, but nothing sticks out to me. Let's move on to tight end for the Eagles. We talked about this a little bit. You like Richard Rodgers. He hasn't done much, but he's exceeded his output or his projected output in almost every game this year. With injuries at the tight end position, they got to throw to somebody. Richard Rodgers, tell me why you like this guy so much.
I don't know, man. This is more of a kind of a gut play. I play tight ends a lot on Showdown just because they seem to find a way to be just impossible to cover. And I for whatever reason, it feels like tight ends go off pretty consistently on Showdown. So that's one reason why I look at him. But Richard Rodgers, he's an athletic guy, right? He's a big guy. He played with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay for a while.
Yeah.
And Carson Wentz loves his tight ends, so I think he's going to throw to him. I think it's a risky play for sure, but I think that there's a good opportunity for him to end up with 6-7 catches and 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, Deshawn Jackson's not your red zone target, so I don't. Maybe Fulgham is, but there's got to be somebody else in there for you.
So let's clarify one thing for you guys real quick. Obviously, we're talking about tournaments. We're talking about large field tournaments here. Showdown, you have to be different. You have to focus on differentiating yourself from the field. And sometimes you have to go with low percentage plays with high upside and low owned plays with high upside. This is the situation where you would go with the Richard Rodgers. You'd go with the guy who can get 2 touchdowns and 14 yards with 15% ownership. Low probability of him going off, high upside on a team that's based around their offense around tight ends with 2 of the best tight ends in the league, in my opinion. Richard Rodgers, take a look at him. Don't go all in on this guy. At least I'm not going to, but you should have a couple lineups with him. So Jason Croom and Hakeem Butler, we talked about a little bit. These are $200 guys that you could throw in. Hakeem Butler, no one knows who the hell this guy is. The only reason why I know who he is because he was drafted by the Cardinals. I sort of know what he's capable of. I watched some film on him in college. I don't know if that's going to translate into the tight end position. I have no idea. But I'm going to take a flyer on this guy at $200. The roster construction with a $200 player on this slate is going to make you super different. And you can also play high probability plays in the captain. Are you going to get any of these Croom or Butler plays? Maybe one lineup each? What do you think?
Maybe Croom. I don't know if I'm going to go Butler. I have no idea what a wide receiver is doing at tight end. So
yeah, I mean the dude's like 6'7" or 6'8". He's giant. So maybe they're just going to use him to jump over everybody in the middle of the field. Evan Ingram. Let's talk about this guy. $8,000. This dude hasn't done shit all year. Look at all that red. All that red means he scored below what he was projected at a median level.
I'm not ready to accept that he's not good. I will have exposure to Evan Ingram tomorrow night.
And I think the field is gonna agree with all this as far as they don't like seeing this, you know? Like you don't want to put money into a dude who is most likely gonna fail. I think if his ownership is low, I'm gonna put him in I'm gonna put him in the captain. You know? He's a good player. We've seen him play well. Now is he why did he play well? I don't know. Maybe it was lucky. But in my opinion, I think he's a good player who is on a bad team, and he could go off any week.
Yep, he's very athletic. I think if Sterling Shepard comes back, it might help him, just because the field's going to be a little bit more spread out. So
this week, I think kicker and defense is actually in play. I don't think that anyone wants to play this defense. I don't think anyone at all would consider these defenses. I mean, at least I wouldn't. But the reason why I would want to play them is because I think that no one's going to want to play them. Are you getting any Eagles or Giants defense? And what about the kickers?
Yeah, kickers I'll probably have to have a little bit of exposure to, as well as defenses. I'll lean a little bit more towards the Giants side. I expect Carson Wentz to get a little sloppy at times. I'm calling it. Marcus Golden's going to have 2.5 sacks tomorrow night.
All right, so let's move on to our phase of the night. I'm fading Boston Scott. I think he's going to be too high owned. There's a chance that he goes off because he's the starting running back, obviously. And he could get the bulk of the carries in the third and fourth quarter simply because the Eagles are leading. It's a risky play, obviously. It all depends on your risk tolerance. In my opinion, I'm trying to win a tournament with 100,000 entries, and playing a guy that's this high owned, I know he's going to be high owned. I don't think that's going to allow me to get to that point. If I fade him and he has a bad game like he has every game this year, I'm automatically up on a lot of the field. Let's talk about your pick there, Ellie. Devontae Freeman. What are you thinking about him, fading him?
Yeah, really it's going to be more of a natural fade just because I'm going to be heavier on the pass game for New York, and it's kind of negatively correlated to stack the running back in there too. I'll have a little bit of exposure, but again, the key point here is ownership. If everyone's leaning towards Boston Scott, Devontae Freeman is a pretty strong pivot. Granted, I mean, it does open up for a different game type, but again, you're talking about people who can dominate target shares. Boston Scott might be the offense for Philly, and if they get shut down at all, then you're looking at Devontae Freeman probably having a good game because he's going to get carries with Philly getting shut down, right? So that's where I'm at with that. I'm going to keep an eye on ownership and any line movement.
All right, so we're going to go to our taking a stand at captain. These are plays that we are comfortable playing in probably 30-40% of our lineups. I'm going with Daniel Jones. I think that, typically I don't like playing quarterback at captain. It's just not my style because of how high owned they are. But I think this guy has the rushing upside, and I think he can actually have a pretty good game. I think Carson Wentz can also have a pretty good game. He also has a decent rushing upside. He can sneak it in from the 5-yard line or whatever. But Daniel Jones, in my opinion, I think he's going to be under-owned, and especially at captain. I can get different in other ways. I would rather take the raw points of Daniel Jones, potentially getting two passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown, maybe 50 yards rushing. Let's talk about your pick there, Ellie. What do you think?
Yeah, I like Deshawn Jackson because of his pricing. I know we didn't do a show on Monday night, but I went pretty heavy Kenyon Drake in the captain spot. And yeah, I know we're going to hear a lot about, you got lucky because he had that 81-yard touchdown run at the end of the game. Yeah, but he had
it. Happened. It happened. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So that took me from not profiting to profiting, right?
Exactly. And you chose that because you your game script was based around the Cardinals blowing out the team, and you have Kenyon Drake as the guy getting all the carries. So that's why you would choose that.
Right, that particular lineup literally had Greg Zuerlein as the only Cowboys player because I thought that's how lopsided I thought the blowout would be. Now, the only mistake with that game script was I didn't put it in defense. So had I been consistent with that game script, there would have been a pretty solid chance I would have been, one of the top lineups. So that's one of the things that these value guys will get you. And in Deshawn Jackson's case, it's one of those Kenyon Drake type situations. He needs one explosive play, and he can do it. Remember, this is the same Giants. Well, not the same Giants team, but this is the same rivalry that they literally told the punter not to punt to Deshawn Jackson with no time left on the clock, right? While the Giants were winning the game. Deshawn Jackson hates the Giants. You know, I expect big things, and anything can happen.
I know we're mainly talking about Draftkings on this show. I know we didn't mention that at the beginning of the show. But with this guy is a perfect captain play on FanDuel. He's got it's only half point PPR because he's got that 3-catch, 120-yard, 2-touchdown sort of upside that you want. Now here, I personally think he's going to be a little bit lower owned just because people don't know what to expect from him. And if you're playing in the lower stakes, if you're playing in the $1.20 max, if you're playing in the quarter 20 max or the mini max, typically the people adjusting to news, the ownership lags a little bit. So in that case, I would go heavier on Deshawn Jackson. All depends on ownership. Tomorrow he could be 60% owned and I might not want to play him at all. We'll just have to wait on that. So let's talk about our final thoughts on this matchup here. Ellie, lead us out on roster construction. Are you setting any rules? What are you doing when you're building for Showdown as opposed to like a normal slate?
So I'm going to intentionally avoid negatively correlating plays. All right, so I'm not going to have Devontae Freeman and Boston Scott in the same lineup unless that game script lineup calls for it. So again, if I think Boston Scott will be used as wide receiver, then I might be a little bit more okay with Devontae Freeman being in there. But for the most part, I don't really need to set any rules because I'm building 4-2 specifically, or 2-4 stacks, with the 2 being the captain, right? So I can go through and identify lineups that I like, and then you can compare ownership by multiplying all the ownership shares together to get an idea of how many duplicates that you got. And you talked about that on a show before. It really just is the easiest way to identify if the lineup's good. I mean, you can even take the chalkiest possible captain, put him in there, and build 150 lineups just to that. See if you can find a chalky lineup that isn't duplicated, because it does move around a little bit, right? So I mean, there are ways to get different, and that's really what I'm looking to do. Is I handpick based on game script, and I'll force my builds into doing that by just selecting the max amount of players that I want in a lineup per team. So even putting in the garbage ones, right? It kind of gives you an idea of what some of the shitty lineups look like. So it does help to see those sometimes too. But that's where I'm at for this slate, and it's going to be interesting. We need to pay very close attention to ownership. But I think it's going to be a little more high scoring than what Vegas line has. So I think we'll be able to get a little bit more creative.
Yeah, I agree. I think the over is definitely in play here. I think that the defenses you could possibly fade. I want to see ownership. There's potential for the defenses to be higher owned than I think they should be, because these are 2 shitty teams, and just people think automatically that 2 shitty teams can't score. Well, I think it's the opposite. I think they score more than they should against each other. Yeah. So obviously when you're playing Showdown, I keep preaching it. Do not put in a lineup that's going to be heavily duped. You might as well just exit out you might as well just refund your entries. You might as well not even play them.
Just play head to head if you're going to do that.
Play head to head, play a double up, play a whatever. Just don't put it in a tournament. For example, if you're doing one lineup If you just want to put one $10 lineup into the biggest contest, what is it, 100K to first, 200K to first, whatever it is, which I don't necessarily recommend, but if you wanted to do that, focus on projected ownership. There's tons of projected ownership out there from multiple sites. Some of them are free. If you pay for a subscription to these sites, use the projected ownership. They're very close. They're as close as they possibly can be. They're really good. And just multiply the ownership. Open up your iPhone, open up the calculator, and multiply it. Open up Excel, whatever it is, multiply it up, and multiply that by the entries. You're going to find out real quick if your lineup is too chalky. And then at that point, there's no point in playing it. Do your best to focus on not duplicating a lineup. Doesn't mean you have to play a dumb lineup. It just means you need to be a little bit different, whether it's at captain or if you play a chalky captain, mix it up in the flex with two positions, potentially around 20% or lower. All right, Ellie, send them out. What do you think? What's your prediction for this game? Do you have a thought on final score?
Yeah, I think it's going to be weird. I'm going to go with 29-21 New York.
I think New York is going to keep it close. I'm thinking 30-27 Eagles.
Cool.
At this point, it's a fucking flip of a coin. I have no idea. These teams suck ass.
Bro, they could trade quarterbacks halfway through the game. Like at halftime,
possible.
Swap teams. Like, all right, bro, I'm gonna go play for the Eagles now. I mean, who knows? Like,
it's possible.
About either one of these teams, and neither team gives a shit about the fucking playoff opportunity that they have. The Cowboys still have the best opportunity to win that division. So, I mean, it's an actual important game tomorrow night. So we got to keep that shit in mind. I don't know.
I mean, honestly, like the Cowboys could lose every game the rest of the year. I mean, it's possible.
Right, and especially if Zeke's going to keep fumbling because they're not good. Their defense is not good.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, the only reason they were winning any games was because Dak Prescott was fucking throwing for 5 touchdowns every game.
Yeah, bro.
So let's take us out on this. If Jalen Hurts was $1,200, which he's not, he's $6,000. If he was $1,200, would you play him? Is he the next Taysom Hill?
Kind of, but I've seen Jalen Hurts throw the ball pretty consistently, so I have to say he might be a little bit better than Taysom Hill right now.
I think he's a better quarterback, obviously, but as a backup quarterback, is he the best backup quarterback option you can add? Because they're on Twitter they're talking about the small package with with Jalen Hurts. He's gonna get some playtime as a backup quarterback. I'm not gonna. Obviously, he's $6,000. There's absolutely no reason to pick him unless you think that Carson Wentz is gonna, break his leg this week.
It's a game script you can have with the Eagles. I mean, their offensive line sucks. So,
in a 20 max, I wouldn't play a single lineup with Jalen Hurts. In a 150 max, I'd probably have 2 lineups with him as the captain. Just in case.
Yeah, I build 148 and then hand build those 2 myself.
Exactly. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, we're doing Showdown videos every week, Showdown slates. Please subscribe, like our videos, help us out. Thank you very much. We'll see you for Sunday Night Football.